So here's an interesting thing. After you retire, what do you do next day? And if it's the same as what you were doing before retirement, you had a really good job. Yeah. And there's a lot of that with me. I'm going to the school tonight. I don't need to go anywhere, but I'm going to the school tonight because I want to be there. So the only reason I do something now is because I want to be there.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with John Will, and John is basically known as the father of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Australia. He's also one of the Dirty Dozen, one of the first 12 non-Brazilians to get a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've been following his work for years. He's produced books, he's produced instructionals, he's produced very thoughtful blog posts and social media posts, and I'm just thrilled to have him on. John, how are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Thank you for having me, Stephan. As I said before the recording started, I'm just kind of pretty happy to have a conversation with you. I don't know. We've been on similar trajectories for a long time, but we just never.
We've met very briefly, but I think you were teaching a seminar and I was either recovering from a surgery or about to go into some surgery, so I wasn't partaking. But I really liked your pedagogy when you were I think you were teaching some kickboxing. I think you were teaching the Superman punch, and I liked your teaching progression. Yeah.
Superman punch into fireman's carry, probably, or something like that.
Well, perhaps that's where it went, but I had to go.
Can't remember.
So this is the first interview I'm doing post Abu Dhabi, ADCC. What are your thoughts of what you saw at ADCC?
Yeah, I was really fired up to watch it. I guess as many were, right? Since Gordon Ryan, like him or dislike him, he's brought more eyeballs to it. And, like probably analogous to Muhammad Ali back in the day, and like him or not like him, who cares? Like, it just brought more people in. And I was really interested in, and it was just so, as you're aware, Stephan, that the brackets were so stacked with talent that I was so pumped to watch it. And Higan Machado was out here. He comes out for a couple of weeks every year, and for a tournament that I run a tournament and one time a year. And then after the tournament, we always go on a holiday. We went to India for a couple of weeks before COVID, and this time we just went to Bali because I wanted to watch the ADCC in a big screen TV in a villa somewhere. So we did that, and it was great watching it with him to get his take on all the stuff, right? Which he did because he knows all those guys, the older school ones, Cyborg and Penner and all of that.
So it was interesting to watch guard passing make a comeback and to watch and less leg locking than the last one, that's for sure.
Yes. It seemed, it's hard to summarize it because there's a lot happening. But I guess if someone asked me for a 1 minute idea about it, I think it was almost like a return to conservative jiu-jitsu. You could call it that. Conservative jiu-jitsu, less funky stuff, and just solid basics done well. And as you point out, pass, dominate, mount, choke, which is what we were doing in the 80s, which is, that's all you did, whether it was a street situation because there was less of a divide between the street applications of jiu-jitsu and sport jiu-jitsu in the 80s and 90s. I didn't start till 1986. But I guess that's early for a lot of people. But in the 80s and 90s, there wasn't a divide. There was like jiu-jitsu was for fighting everybody else, particularly martial artists, because they were the easiest ones to beat up. So we used to, that was where it was at. And there wasn't much difference between the jiu-jitsu you did in fights and the jiu-jitsu you did in what little competition there was at the time. Whereas now there's a divide. It's quite a long divide, a big divide. So it's gone through a lot of changes at BJJ.
Yeah, I think statistically this ADCC, the rear naked choke, that innovative brand new technique, was a number one finisher, and the other super modern was the armbar.
And passing, you pointed out, passing and that. And I guess the passing comes down to there's a lot more. I've always been exposed to this because the Machados, particularly Higan Machado, was very into wrestling when he moved to America in 1990. So we had wrestling people like Bob Anderson and stuff teaching at the academy.
Okay.
So we had, Hagen Machado in particular was in love with anything grappling, and that includes all the leg locks of Sambo and a lot of wrestling, of which there was a lot of great wrestling in America. Not so great in California, but there were still really good wrestlers in California. So we were exposed to that day one. So we thought arm drags, Russian ties, 2-on-1s, duck unders, and all the shots and legs, high crotches. That was just normal jiu-jitsu for us. We didn't know that everyone else didn't do that. But now, of course, everyone's on board with all that stuff. So I think that when you bring a lot more wrestling into it, then you get the more dominant player will get the guy on a takedown, and then he's passing the guard. So guard passing, there's been a bit of a resurgence in guard passing, as you alluded to, probably because of the improvement or the inclusion of more wrestling technique and strategy into jiu-jitsu, which is awesome.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the improved wrestling, because you watch a lot of the teams getting ready for this over the last couple of years, and they're wrestling. But it's also, I think, leg lock awareness that, if you're going against a really good leg locker, then your guard passing has to be on point, and probably you're going to come in much lower. You're not going to stand there and let them entangle your legs. So
that's a good point. Good point. Great point. Yeah.
But so when you were, go ahead.
I think that probably what's happened in the last, I don't know, correct me on the numbers, but probably the last, let's say 10 years, since the leg lock game and Ashigarami, which started from Kani Basami, right? The scissor takedown, which puts you into the saddle or inside Senkaku, whatever they call it. We used to call it inside Ashi. Right. But since Kani Basami put you, that's what started the whole thing. And I'm talking about a long time ago. I was just telling someone this morning that I saw a statue in Greece a couple of months ago in the Athens Museum, a battle between a centaur and a man, and the guy's doing inside Senkaku with a heel hook. I mean, right? So
yes,
guys, they just get over yourself, right? It's a bit weird. But that since that game has come in, probably largely through the efforts of John Danaher and the crew in New York, because they've spread it right. I saw other people doing that. A lot of that stuff in 1989, 1990.
Certainly Eric Paulson and the shoot wrestling guys.
Prior to them starting. I mean, the influence came from Sambo, because we were competing in Sambo back in 1990, because there was before the UFC, because there wasn't many competitions in America for BJJ people. There weren't many schools, so there's no competitions. So we just had to enter judo competitions and Sambo competitions and wrestling competitions if you wanted to compete. And so my coaches were all over the Sambo leg lock idea, thinking that we need to develop counters to that. We didn't. We just took them down, mounted them, and choked them. but because our control was better. But they had those things. So we were getting into that back then. But it's evolved a lot more now, of course.
So that's an interesting point. Like, we can look at centaurs heel hooking Greeks from, 500 BC, and we can look at some Russian guy showing some crazy leg lock from some bootleg tape that we got our hands on in the late 80s.
That's it, yeah.
And we can look at, Bart Vale shoot boxing leg locks in the early 90s. So it's the same techniques, but there has been evolution within that. I think the transitions and the controls and the defenses have come up. I mean, maybe there was one dude doing those things in the 90s, but now it seems like... So I just want you to distinguish between the techniques and then what has evolved.
Yes. I think you've hit the nail on the head when you said one guy doing it. Sure. That's precisely what was going on, because we're all equally intelligent, right? I mean, we're pretty close. We can all start our car and add up. So we're all smart enough to come up with something if we put time in. So That's exactly the point. There were people or pockets or individuals. I mean, Jean-Jacques Machado was into doing inside ashigarami and heel hooks and all kinds of setups from that, lifting with a butterfly guard, dropping the guy down into reverse X guard, and then setting up in what they call the bear trap. He was doing that in 1990. I mean, holy shit. I mean, 25 years ago. But that was him. So there was pockets. And what's happened between now and then, of course, is the internet.
Yeah.
So now what one guy is doing and being successful with, because there was no way, Stephan, for that to get out of his academy.
Yeah.
How could it escape as an idea? But now, of course, someone sees something on the internet, it escapes to the whole planet in a minute. And then you've got every kid on the planet doing it both legs, both sides. And you remember Bill Wallace, right? He was, his little system of stepping up the kick. He got the 3 kicks off one leg, off that lead left leg. But he was doing it, but there was no way for that to get out. Yeah. And that's why he was beating everyone. But as soon as the internet happened, every kid on the planet who was into karate was doing that left leg and right leg before Christmas. And so that means now you've got 100,000 brains on it. Wow. And then evolution happens. And that's exactly what's happened with jiu-jitsu. So there's techniques that many people mistakenly think have never been done before. That's incorrect. But the evolution has happened post-internet, where then if something's in the spotlight in ADCC or in any tournament or anything, or if someone just popping something online with you and Rich, is it your buddy, Rich?
Yeah, Richie, sure.
Yeah, Richie. So you put something up there and someone goes, oh, that's really interesting, cool. And next minute their whole school's doing it. Yeah. Then they do it in a tournament and then there's eyeballs on that and then away it goes. So now it's a very different world. It's so awesome.
Yeah. And just to go back to the Jean-Jacques Machado example, yes, he was doing butterfly elevations into reverse X, into bear trap, but the level of resistance that he was running into wouldn't have been as high as it is now because people have no idea. No. Like, what did he do? I don't know. It's a crazy Jean-Jacques thing. Just tap out.
Yes.
But now people are like, oh, no, I know what's going on. And you need to know the answer and the answer and the answer to the obstacles people are going to put in your way.
And that's probably why we didn't see as many leg attacks in the ADCC, because both sides know what's going to happen. So it sort of cancelled itself out. So people are doing different things, which is like mount, underhook, back take, choke. I mean, it
still works
with that, but you get the point. So there's a lot of people that know, and I wouldn't claim to know. I mean, because unless you're on a mat that's, where people have just gone down that leg lock rabbit hole for the last 2 years, and every single person is doing it and hunting it. It's going to take. I'm making up shit now, but it might be 2 years. It might be 2 years of everyone in the advanced class trying to get heel exposure. 2 years of that before everyone then develops the natural resistance to it. And and then they go off on a different topic. It's like a virus, same. Yeah. I think that's a fair analogy, like how viruses work.
Can you take us back to training in Southern California in the late 80s? I mean, you're Australian, so what were you doing in Southern California training jiu-jitsu?
I was into cross training in martial arts from 1979 to like mid-80s, 6-7 years. And by cross-training, I meant I never felt the fights that I got into as a young kid, even though I was training taekwondo and karate and doing the normal things, the fights I got into always ended up being double leg, takedown, mount, die. And that worked every time. Right. I just had a 100% success rate with that simple strategy. And so some part of me knew that all the martial arts stuff, that was seriously flawed because I never used it. Even though I was training that, I wasn't using it in the fights that I was getting to. So I went to Southeast Asia, 1975, 76, thinking that the answer will be there. And so I trained a lot of martial arts all through Indonesia, Silat, for 6 or 7 years. And I did some undercover, some Silats like that, another Silat is much more like Thai boxing in that they do bag work, elbows and knees, and they're pretty hardcore. Those systems of Silat always win the championships, and you never see all the other guys carrying on with their shit. I shouldn't say shit. It's better than nothing, but not that much better. But they were
more fantasy based. How's that?
Well, it's anachronistic. It's I call it LARPing, live action role playing. It's live action role playing, which describes 95% of the martial arts on the planet, if you ask me. It's live action role playing. And I'm not saying that, I'm not dissing it. I'm just saying it's live action role playing. There's a role for that. Some people want to play dress ups and engage in an orchestrated dance, albeit combative dance. And that's fine. There's a lot of value in socialization, fitness, and this and that. But don't confuse that with fighting, And I worked this out in around 1980, because when I was in Southeast Asia, I was doing work with the police over there as an undercover, because I was a white guy, so I could buy the drugs and set up the deal, and then bang, bust the guys, and there would always be a fight. And I would start it because that was the signal: jump out of the bushes and catch them. So, there was this real disconnect between the martial arts I was training and what actually happened in fights. And I became aware of that, so I wanted to fix it. So I was cross-training, right, and then did some wrestling and, and just more, an urban combative style of fighting. And this was way before the UFC. Now, part of that was, then what I had to find a way to make a living, because I was just a dojo rat, finding exotic ways to scrape $25-$30 a week together to pay for my rice and shit. So many exotic ways. There's a lot of stories in that. But when I came back to Australia, and I kind of found the best way, which was I made a martial arts magazine called Blitz, which was the Australasian martial arts magazine. There was another magazine out at the time, but it was all very conservative stuff. I wrote an article in it about cross-training, and I just got canned by the traditional martial arts. Oh, they shot me down like 1980, maybe 1982, maybe 84, 85.
I thought Bruce Lee killed that mentality, but I guess it was. But you know what? When I did traditional martial arts I was training in, if they found out at the same time, if they found out that you were training somewhere else, hit the road. You're out of here. You can't even show the techniques to the same people in the dojo, let alone showing it to people outside the dojo.
Yes, we were a weird crew back then, and still are, but we were weird in a negative way back then. And so I wrote this article about cross-training, and a couple of the well-known guys in this country wrote back and said, what the hell would you know? Like, you're just a kid. I was probably 22, 24, 25, I don't know. And I wrote back a reply, which I thought was, and that they refused to publish it because the owner of the magazine was the friend of those guys. And I overreacted, which is what I did quite a lot in my life. So my tendency is to overreact. So I overreacted by just deciding to put that magazine out of business. I know that's not that was my reaction. So I went down to a publishing house. I go, how much to make a martial arts magazine? They go, $10,000. I go, $10,000. So if I sell $10,000 worth of ads, I break even, and then I get to say what I want. So I ran around to every martial arts store I could find and school and whatever, and said, if I make a magazine, will you buy an ad? Yeah. And I did it with a Commodore 64 in my one-bedroom flat, and I made a martial arts magazine called Blitz. Took me 10 issues, put them out of business, and then I was done with it, because that's how I knew I did it for the wrong reasons. I just goal achieved, they were out, so I gave the magazine to someone else and then I moved on. But while I was editor of the magazine, so this is the point, second or third issue, a guy came out from Brazil, Marcelo Beiring, who is a student of Hickson's, and he offered a challenge, $50,000, no fight, winner take all, no holds barred. I mean, what, $50,000, Stephan, in 1985 or 86? That's out of control. First of all, no one had the money. Second of all, no one took him up on it. But that got me wondering, who is this person? So I made a call or two to America, LA, had some friends there. They said, I think there's these Brazilians in a garage in Torrance. So I got on a plane, come over, met Horian, and Hoyce was a kid, but Horian. And I did 5 lessons with Horian to find out, and an interview to find out what this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was all about. And on the 5th lesson, Higan Machado, who was 20 years old at the time, had come up, couldn't speak a word of English. He taught me my 5th lesson because Horian had to take his kids to Disneyland that day. Thankfully, because I bonded with Higan right away, even though he couldn't speak any English, he was passionate about it. And there was no communication verbally, but his passion, you know what it's like. Mm-hmm. You and I are into it, right? So we would find a way to, and whereas Horian was just kind of going through the motions because I guess he was tired from doing 40 private lessons a week. But Higan was into it. So we bonded pretty quickly. I came home to Australia having had 5 lessons and just had as many fights as I could with judo black belts, Japanese jiu-jitsu black belts who were easy targets, and just tapped them all out with 10 techniques. And you would be able to guess what the techniques were. And then I went, I should do 20 lessons.
I'll be invincible.
That's what I thought. And it was kind of true for a bit. So I went back 6 months later, I earned enough money, saved enough money teaching martial arts, which at that point was a silat come pad work, come grappling, hybrid MMA thingy. And I came back. So I had 40 students, so earned pocket money, right? And I came back after saving up enough for an airfare to America, went back to Horian's garage for 1 lesson with the intention of getting an address in Brazil, because I figured it would be free down there, like it was in every other third world country on the planet, meaning training's free, right? But it was not. But I thought that. Higan was there and he says, don't train here, no good. Go to Brazil. And I said, that's exactly what I want to do. And he said something like, I'm going Wednesday. Come with me, which I did. And then we've been best mates ever since. So that's how I got into the jiu-jitsu. That's a long-winded story, but yeah.
So that's back in the era when the Gracie family and the Machados were still teaching together out of the same garage, obviously.
They were still, in America?
Yeah.
Yes, it was Horian teaching, but he had people learning, but he couldn't do all the lessons. So he got his people up from Brazil, paid them $2 an hour or something, whatever it was. Charged 50, it was classic. And then Higan was one of those people. But, that didn't last long because they were wearing, the Machados were all wearing the Gracie Barra patch on their back. Because Gracie Barra was owned by 3 Machados and 1 Gracie. It was 3/4 owned by Machados. Okay. They were the main fuckers there. Carlos Gracie Jr. was on the side of the mat sitting down, waving his hands, but the instruction was all Machados.
Yeah.
And Higan was the national champion, and he was their best student ever, the best competitor ever, with 364 fights winning streak. But no one's ever come close to it. So they owned Gracie Barra. So then when they come to America, they were wearing the Gracie Barra patch. But Horian said, if you're teaching outside of my garage, because they wanted to open up another academy over the other side of LA, in the, what's it called? I forget, over the hill, not down south in Torrance, but the north part, in the valley.
Okay.
So they want, which is quite a long way. It's you're not going to steal anyone's students in the valley. It's an hour and a half drive on the 405. So they wanted to open up a school. And he said, no, you can't use the Gracie name. And they said,
right. That was that lawsuit about Gracie Jiu-Jitsu versus Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Right. So it wasn't just the Machados. He did not want anyone using that name. So they went, really? We've always been Gracie. We're the family. What are you talking about? So because of that, they had to, here's the word, reluctantly, they didn't want to change the name to Machado Jiu-Jitsu. They did not want to do it. So they had to, because Horian wouldn't allow the name out. So then it became Machado Jiu-Jitsu. And that's where, if there's any such thing as a split, because it's more fights within the Gracies amongst themselves and outside. So that's when it happened, and they started doing their own thing.
Yeah, it was a very proprietary era, and I only had peripheral glimpses at it at the time, but it would be apparent. You'd go to a seminar taught by one of the names that we've just mentioned, and they would only teach 2 or 3 techniques at the seminar. And then you go to another seminar and they teach the same 2 or 3 approved techniques. It was very much insider knowledge, and we're just going to drip feed this out a tiny bit at a time because it's our superpower. And then especially once MMA started, the sort of the proprietary approach to it was a very different era than it is now.
Yeah.
And it's understandable given the context, but it's just people have the young folks these days, they just have no idea about how much information they get because I learned the armbar from the guard. I learned the UPA escape, and I think I learned the one arm under guard pass, and that was basically it for instruction, going to multiple seminars with multiple of those names.
And that's night one in a normal jiu-jitsu school in somewhere down south in Alabama. No, we've come a long way. And yeah, but it was weird. I mean, it was interesting for me to be part of that early. Me, Bob Bass, Chris Howder, right? There's a lot of us saw all that unfold and then saw it all grow. And then even in Brazil, Gracie Barra, when I went back to Brazil, I went back there about, I forget, 1990 or something. And I went to Gracie Barra and there's only 4 guys on the mat. There was 4 people on the mat. And it was gone. Like the mat was full, but then when the Machados left, everyone left. And John Jacques opened up a school around the corner and all the main guys were training there. Half. There was High and Gracie and Helion. They all followed the Machados when they bailed, and there was no one left at Gracie Barra.
What was it like teaching jiu-jitsu in Australia? Because I'm assuming you periodically went back to Australia to build up your teaching empire, and Australia is sort of famously a combative culture, but now you're teaching people to like roll around on the ground and like hug people. This is all pre-UFC.
No, it was difficult. I mean, I wasn't evangelical about it. Because training for me was never a business. It was just, that's what I wanted to do. And whoever wanted to follow, awesome. But I wasn't trying to promote it or anything that much. I never have actually. I've never really been that way inclined. I've just gone where I wanted to go, and enough people said, that's an interesting direction. I think I'll go with you. And that's what's made me my living. And that's why I've taught 2,740 seminars. Yeah, that's the number. And 28,000 classes I think I'm up to now. But I've never planned to like grow. I'm not interested, in growing things, but it's just been organic growth.
Okay.
But it was difficult back in those days. It was very quiet until, I would say, actually not just the UFC. I don't think it built momentum until 5 or 6 years after the UFC. I don't think it was until about 2000, the year 2000, the turn of the century. That's when normal people would come on and go, I think I might want to train with you. Whereas prior to that, in the 90s, it was only fighters. I think that's fairly safe to say. Only fighters, martial artists / fighters were interested in BJJ. And it was only in 2000 to 2005, normal human beings would come in and say, I want to do some of this.
I think to be training in the 90s, you had to be willing to go into a place where there was a bunch of shirtless guys wearing nothing but the little bad boy spandex shorts, beating the crap out of each other in just a giant slithery pool of sweat all across the mat. And you'd have to go, yeah, this looks pretty cool. And like right away, you've alienated 90% of the population.
99.9, yeah.
So what do you think made this? What do you think flipped it over in the 2000s? What do you think some of it must have been critical mass.
That's a really interesting question. I've never been asked that before. I'd say you know what? I mean, you've put me on the spot because it's an interesting question. Because, the instinctive answer would be UFC, but that's not true. I think it was very slow after the UFC for a bit. And even then after the UFC, it was still only the people interested in the UFC, meaning fighters, interested in BJJ. So perhaps it was the internet. I think the internet / critical mass. It's those two things that then got over into that touched almost, it bleeded into other demographics. Like kickboxing and boxing, very blue collar. Do you have that saying in America or Canada?
Yep.
Blue collar?
Yep.
Right. So very blue collar, right? Boxing. You don't see a bunch of engineers, architects, doctors, shop assistants doing boxing. There's some, but not, that many. But in BJJ, right, you can point to almost any mat now and you got everyone there. Yeah. So that it's a really interesting question, Stephan. I'm not sure about that one. Critical mass.
Well, maybe it was, probably the internet. That was getting a lot of momentum there, and maybe it's just becoming easier to find, especially in the early 2000s, post YouTube, it's becoming easier to find videos of, Jiu-Jitsu conquering other systems, like the clips that previously only the super nerds that like you and I would have been watching of, like, hey, this guy thought that he'd come into the UFC as a capoeira stylist, or this guy was in Gracie in action and got his, nose broken. Those clips started coming out, but that's again a niche sort of blood sporty type thing. Maybe it was starting to have a curriculum. Maybe it was. I was completely wrong about three things. I thought it'd never become mainstream. I was wrong about that. I was
wrong also.
I thought women would never ever join the sport, and I was wrong about that.
You're 2 for 2.
And I thought that no-gi would never take off because, especially for women, because I thought the additional layers of cloth would prevent some of the body contact, and I was wrong there too. So
maybe an easy analogy. It would be good to draw an analogy between this and, say, cryptocurrency, right? Why doesn't when people hear, first of all, they don't know about it. This is not an ad for crypto, but they don't know about it. It's just this vague, weird thing they don't understand. Then even the people who do invest money see that some people are doing really well here. They're not getting a 4% return a year. They're getting 100% return a year, or a 400%. So they go to try to buy it. It's just too hard. They can't. There's no easy way to do it. And they go, I'm out. And so you have to be a super nerd to punch through or get over all those extra hoops and jump through the hoops and do the 100 hours of research so you can actually make an intelligent call and then do it. Maybe it's like that with BJJ. But now one day, maybe the next cycle of crypto, when it just becomes phone, one button, buy, crypto, you're in, then everyone can do it. And which I think will happen. And then maybe it was like that with BJJ. It just became, it's so easy to, one, find a BJJ school and do an hour's research is so easy that was almost impossible earlier on. So that, I think, probably was one of the main things that just those barriers melted away.
Yeah.
The barriers that we're seeing now with crypto, to use that again.
Well, having done martial arts for decades and decades, when I go into a new martial arts school, part of me is still a little bit nervous. Like, who knows what kind of lunatics are here? And that's me. And I'm a big guy. I've got a lot of experience. I've been training for years. I probably know a lot about the school I'm going into, but sort of the animal part of my brain is like, be on the lookout here. There could be some complete lunatic here. And when I try and put myself into the mind of somebody who's brand new to the sport, going through the door into a martial arts school, just to check it out, just to ask some questions, it's actually a pretty brave activity for people who haven't been immersed in it and haven't been steeped in it. And, it's either jiu-jitsu or badminton. I'm not sure which. And to cross that threshold to come in, that's a frightening thing for a lot of people.
I've always said a similar thing. I've just been aware of how difficult it is for people to walk up the stairs. We're not above a laundromat. To walk up those stairs, smell that certain smell, which is unusual. They're not finding that anywhere else in their life. And then looking at whatever visual hits them when they walk in and still sign up. That is quite, it's easy to forget how hard and challenging that is. So one of the little things I've done in my school, because I do realize that, is I'm very aware of what I want them to see when they look in. So if someone makes an inquiry, they can't come on Tuesday or Thursday night at 7:00. They can't come on Monday and Wednesday. They can't come on Friday. They are coming at 6:00 on Tuesday and Thursday. That's the only time. Because on those nights, when they come in, what they see is my first little intro class, my preparatory class, which runs, you've got to be in for 3 months before you go up into even the novice class, before the intermediate class, before the advanced class, so preparatory class. That's what they're seeing. And they are doing much more normal things.
Not specializing in north-south attacks.
Right. People are throwing light strikes. They're shelling up, coming in, clinching, or they're hitting pads, or they're doing a fence, question, smack. They're doing things that the average person, when they think of self-defense, imagine. So I want those two things to line up. And then, sure, we'll do a bit of groundwork in there, but it's only part of a larger thing. So we do that, and that way we don't freak them out. And then in the 3 months, if they join up, we don't even let them join up. So stage 1, what are they looking at? Stage 2, if they want to join up, you can't join up. You could pay for 4 classes. And you go into that class, and there's a rotating curriculum there, which is 12 pre-designed classes that would endlessly cycle through. So if you join up at 6, you do 6, 7, 8, 9. Doesn't matter when you join up, because we're always circling. And any 4 that you do are designed so that you see some of the normal things that you think are self-defense. Then you also see some things that are actually self-defense. And then you also see some stuff that starts to prepare you for BJJ. And that's worked, because that gets them through that difficult part. And then they join up and they cycle through those 12 lessons twice, and then they get into my BJJ class. So that works for me. And I've come to that trying lots of different ways, but mainly because of the point that you brought up.
Is there sparring in that 12 lesson cycle? Right, in the first 3 months?
No. I'm not an idiot. I mean, now people will disagree with this, but, they'll go, no, if you can't do it, you should go home and cry, because we only want. Now, that's true, but they'll self-select as a Darwinian process those people who are tough and hardcore and can deal with it. And that's okay for them. It's just not okay for the 99% of people who really needed it, but have been weeded out because of the Darwinian forces at play. Right. And so it can be easily argued, I think, that we should be helping those people. Right. Yeah. It almost wouldn't matter what the other guy did, it'd be okay. But the 95% of people that need it and is really potentially life-changing for them, those guys, we've got to find a way to make their life better. But even if you and I were playing chess and I didn't know how to play, what are we going to start playing chess? No, we're not. You're going to show me how the men move, teach me a couple of openings, and then we can play chess. So there's still shit to do before we start, right? So it's just weird that some morons allow people into their school, throw them in the deep end and go, what is that? Like, I wonder how they raise their kids. Do you just put them on the BMX bike on the top of the mountain day one and go, do it or die? Do you do that really? It's irksome to me, but whatever. People are weird.
Yeah, it's I mean, you're in good company. There's a lot of people who've that I respect who've definitely moved in that direction. It's very different from how you and I. Well, actually, when you went through the initial lessons at in the Gracie garage, was there sparring there, or did they say, "Oh, this guy's already a tough guy. We need to teach him physically"?
Yeah, more that, and not so much sparring, because what the hell would I know, right? You mount on top of me, I can't get you off. I try to push you off, and you armbar me. As far as sparring goes, it was like that. Let's see if you can get out. Armbar. Now I'll see if you can hold me. You can't. That's all it was.
So kind of like a bit of situational resistance.
That's it. Which for me, Stephan, worked well, which is another side of the argument for just throwing people in the deep end. That impressed me.
Yeah.
It might have dissuaded others. So that 5% that are already fighter mentality, I think for those guys, it's good for them to be smacked up and beaten up.
Yeah.
Because they go, that's exactly now I'm in, right? But that's just not how most people work.
Yeah. I'm of both minds. Like if on the one hand, there's the attachment to however you were brought up, right? Regardless of whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, definitely thrown in the deep end with the sharks. And like, if you're too much of a dick, the club enforcer beats the person down. And that's how you learn that it's not cool to, I don't know, put your chin in a 110-pound girl's eye to submit her because the guy comes along and thrashes you after. There's probably better ways to do that. On the other hand, if you're looking for those super athletes, if they have a choice of doing, if that's your goal, if your goal is to create the top competition team, there might be an argument for not putting those guys, the ex-rugby, high-level rugby player, the ex-high-level wrestler through the 12-lesson cycle and putting them directly in with the hounds.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Gracie Barra, for example, really has staged sparring. Alliance has staged sparring. Like, they don't allow you to spar. They've got a huge base of the pyramid, and as a result, they've got quite a few competitors near the top. So why do you?
Hence Danaher Death Squad. Not taking away from John's efforts, but Henzo's school has 1,000 students.
Yeah.
That self-selects, and now at the top of that, you are going to have 20 natural, amazing athletes. Whereas if you only got a school of 50 people, wow, you've got to be more careful. Yeah. So you've got one, maybe, or the other approach is get more people so you get two, whatever it is. So, you can argue for both sides, but if you do want numbers, which will eventually, as you point out, give you more, the talent, a greater pool of naturally gifted people, then you want numbers. It's a numbers game.
Who's the most naturally gifted person in the sport you've ever worked with? Or are you going to insult somebody by leaving them off this list?
Because I'm, for example, I'm not naturally gifted at all. Like, I'm an idiot that has to very struggle and grind through before I get it. So I've got no problem. I don't see that. I actually see it as a superpower, that my small learning disability makes things hard for me, because I don't learn anything until I understand it. I remember that from primary school, learn the planets of the solar system. And it was weird to me that they went Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. I went, why? That's the wrong order. Because Jupiter's the biggest one. Why the fuck is that number 5? And I was just refusing to understand it and learn it until someone said, no, look, this is how it works. I went, and then I learned it. So I had couldn't do it until I heard the rationale. Once I heard the rationale, some part of my brain opened up. That could be described as a learning disability.
Yeah.
I think it's a superpower because I didn't when I was at school, but now I do because I have to understand everything before I.
Which makes you a much better teacher.
Well, yes. So a lot of people in jiu-jitsu are just great learners. They just learn. They don't know why. They don't know how. They don't know how they do it. Not such great coaches. They're horrible coaches. So I don't. Anyway, to get back to it, I don't think I'm insulting anyone by saying you're not naturally gifted. Like Benny the Jet will say the same thing. You know, he had to grind it out, but no one can argue that he was one of the best kickboxers in the world. Jean-Jacques Machado would be the one of the best I've ever seen. Just learning, like gifted, maybe because he's got a dysfunctional hand, so he just made up for it everywhere else. But he was awesome at soccer, hockey, swimming, whatever he did, he was just rose to the top straight away.
One of my favorite jiu-jitsu sparring experiences was with Jean-Jacques Machado at the Inosanto Academy. I think I was a purple belt, and he gave a seminar, and he wasn't one of those seminars where it was like the 2 or 3 approved techniques. He actually taught a whole bunch of stuff, and I really appreciated it. And then there's some sparring, and so I pulled guard on him, and he passed it like it was nothing. Then he took mount like it was nothing. And then I kind of turned, I was kind of bridging, and I kind of got caught in this weird position, and we stalled out there. And I realized, oh, he has my arm completely extended. Like he was in perfect arm. No, at some point I actually smacked him in the face while responding to his guard pass, just trying to reach and stop his arm. And I apologize. Hey, sorry about that. No problem, my friend. And then he gets to the top. We get caught in this weird position. I realized he's got my arm completely fully extended, and he's not applying 1 ounce of pressure. He's just waiting there, hang out until I realize that my arm is straight and that I guess I should tap because there's no way out of here. It just effortless. It was like fighting the wind.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that are like in my school, I've got around 250 students. Part-time school. I mean, because everyone trains only twice a week because I need all the space. It's only a small mat, 10 by 10 meters.
Really?
Yeah. But I've got 250 people in there, so I have to have 4 different levels of classes, and you're only allowed the 2 classes a week plus open mat. So it's not like, it's a full-time business, you could say, but we only operate like a part-time school. But out of those 250, there's like 3 people that are just insanely, they're gifted. Meaning that I don't think it would matter who the coach was. They would just be above excellent. So that's 3 out of 250.
No.
Now, maybe there's some I haven't recognized that yet, Stephan,
sure,
in the lower ranks, right? But so let's say there's 5 out of 250. You do the percentage.
Small little percentage, yeah. Do you think that they are, with the abundance of visual media now between YouTube and instructionals and apps and competition footage, do you think that they're very strong visual learners? That they can see something on, I don't know, at ADCC and go, oh, I'm going to do that next class. And it goes from their eyes directly into their body?
Yeah. I don't know how people would describe it now. There's probably a lot more science to it. But you know how there used to be this kinesthetic, visual, and I think it's something like visual and kinesthetic are just so connected up that they see it but they feel it and they don't even understand. They do later, of course. They just reverse it. So they do it, make it work, are successful with it. Then they try to understand it, maybe, maybe not. Because you know yourself for sure that the way you improve your understanding is when someone else asks you to teach them.
Yeah.
Because now you've got to make that leap. You've got to get it out of that visual kinesthetic into some other part of your brain, break it down, and then deliver those steps to someone else.
Yeah. And try and figure out how they need to be taught. Do they need to be put into the right position? do they need a drill? Do they need verbal correction? Do they need physical correction? Do they need pressure? Everybody learns differently, and I don't teach a lot of large classes. I work mostly one-on-one, so that's a real luxury I have. Is like, okay, it's this guy, and I know in advance that, I don't know, if we film it, if we do a drill and we film it, and then I give him the video of it, he can watch that, and it'll go into his thick skull, and that's the procedure for teaching this guy, but not that guy.
Yeah. People obviously, like I do privates. And then, for 20 years, my average routine was teach 8 classes a week in the school, do 25, 26 privates a week, and then do 5 to 6 seminars every second weekend. And they're all very different things, right? Because, if I'm teaching, say, 4 or 5 entries into crucifix and then 4 or 5 finishes from crucifix, like a little crucifix package or something, then the way you would teach that to 25 people on the mat, and then the way you teach it to Harry on the private, and then the way you teach it in a seminar are quite different, because the dynamic's very different and the learning models are different. So you get to see that people do learn very differently, but sometimes who cares, because you're teaching a whole bunch of them at once. Yeah. So you have to choose an optimum model just to teach a large group. And then the army and military, 200 people or something, or special ops guys, you've got 6 guys in a padded room somewhere or in a building. So that's what's interesting to me about making your living from a lot of different ways, because you get to see how each different way you approach it. Like your privates is, you get very specific and tuned into that and how you do it. And then somewhere else it's different again. And because a lot of people only teach one way, just do seminars, or they just do something, and then, but there's a lot to be learned from teaching 4 or 5 different ways.
What's teaching the military guys like?
It depends on, because there's so many different levels in there, just like there are in the private sectors. There's different levels. Are you teaching average people? Are you teaching fighters, or are you teaching elite athletes? And the military and other government agencies, it's the same. There's the bottom. I don't mean that with any disrespect, but you know what I mean. There's the, you can
entry level.
Pardon?
Entry level.
Thank you. Entry level. There's entry level, a bunch of soldiers, and then there's Quantico. It comes down to a more select group of people, and then there's some really pointy end shit, tip of the spear kind of stuff, and that's and usually they come with a very different mindset, not so much different skill sets, different skill levels. They can, but usually it's the mindset's very, very different of an elite level person who's being deployed to do stuff that our government doesn't do.
Give me an example of the mindset difference and how that would translate to training.
Yes. Well, I find that the very tip of the spear kinds of people are they're humble. They've got a lot of humility, which you wouldn't think. Like just one tier down, it's all this, like SWAT or something like that. Do you have, does that work? Yeah. SWAT. So they're like all, juiced up in the gym, and they're it's all like that. And it's all about the look. You can tell that they're wearing the gear, the cargo pants and the cams, and they've got the right bag and they've got the right shades, and they're all, they
tactical.
Tactical was the word I was trying to think, but I forgot. So there's the tactical guys, but so they're making a statement about who they are, and they want everyone to know that, because that's so connected to their identity. But the really top guys, they don't want you to know who they are. That's the whole point, right? Hey, Stephan. So at that level now, so they're automatically, those tactical guys they're not ever going to get in there. So it's funny, right? It's almost not what you expect. They're humility, very open to learning, nothing to prove. They just want to improve taking information because they are going to use it. Right? It's not theoretical for them. And it's not part of creating a persona for them. So you take that out. Let's get rid of I'm doing this to create a persona or an identity. I'm doing this because I want it to work. And no, get rid of all that. What's that leave you with? A humble guy or gal, mostly guys. Sorry, viewers, but with that, it's
the truth.
Yeah. Oh, no, hang on. No, I'll back up from that. No, I can't talk a lot about it, but no, there's actually getting to the point where at the really, really seriously pointing end, there's a lot of females now because no one suspects females. So they're really great learners, super learners, I would say. I mean, to get to the really pointy end of anything, right? You've got to be
a good learner.
Learning, yes, right. Whereas a lot of the tactical guys, they're not actually good learners because they're spending too much of their energy looking good and going nowhere.
Yeah.
And the level below them are usually much easier, like the entry level, let's say. They're quite good because they're fresh, new to the job or whatever it is, and they just want to upskill.
Yeah.
And that'll do.
So you teach a ridiculous number of seminars. I mean, obviously, that's part of what your business model is. But do you not get burned out doing that much traveling and that much teaching?
Okay. I've taught a lot of seminars. My average model would be 6 a weekend. I teach one I go somewhere, fly somewhere on a plane. I teach 1 Friday night, 3 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday, fly home. So it's, and that was my model for a long time. Now I've just retired. Now, no one gets scared because what that means to me is very different from what it means to other people. It just means I don't care about money anymore in any way, shape, or form. So I don't need to earn any money. So, I still do. So here's an interesting thing. After you retire, what do you do next day? And if it's the same as what you were doing before retirement, you had a really good job. Yeah. And there's a lot of that with me. I'm going to the school tonight. I don't need to go anywhere, but I'm going to the school tonight because I want to be there. So the only reason I do something now is because I want to be there. Right. But when you're earning a living, you might want to be there for 3 schools, but not want to be there for the other 3. But you're there because they're paying you. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying it was hard, but it was like, it's grindy, as you can imagine. You get on a plane, don't like that. In the queue, security, don't like that. Hotel, away from my wife, don't like that. There's lots to not like. The 2 hours on the mat at someone's school, pretty good.
Yeah.
But that's only, even if you do 5 on a weekend, that's only 10 hours over, I can't do the math, 72 hours, right? So there's a lot of time where you're away from your wife, you're not eating like you would at home, you're in a hotel room, I don't like it, I don't like the plane, the waiting, the queue, the traveling, the shit. So it's not all what people would think, oh, I want that, really? So now that I'm retired, I'm still going to teach some seminars, but I cut way back. I've got 40 people that want me to do a seminar this month, I'll probably do 3, So it's a bit like that. I have to see some of these people. I've known them for 25 years. It's hard to say no to someone that you've known for that long, Stephan.
Yeah.
So I'll say yes. But it's got nothing to do with money anymore.
So having taught thousands and thousands of people, let's just finish with the advice that you end up giving most often to new people. Like, what's the correction? What's the advice? What's the initial input that you've found yourself giving again and again and again that seems to resonate with new people?
There's a few things. One is, right now at the beginning, you want training partners, not opponents. So there's that. Like, we don't want to expose ourselves to resistance before we know how to surf, play chess, or do jiu-jitsu. So I say that not for them, but for the benefit of everyone else.
Yeah.
Right? If you can be a great partner, you're here for all these people, not for you. That's the bad news, because you're selfish. But here's the good side. If everyone else in the room's got the same idea, you've got 20 other people in the room here for you. I say that a lot. So once they realize that that really works, if it's a deal that everyone's signed up for, which is compulsory in my school, you have to be able to sign up to that deal. Otherwise, I don't need anyone in my school. So that really works out, because now you've got, if there's 20 people in the room, you've got 19 people who are great training partners for you and no opponents. You'll get opponents later, as many as you want, but not now. I say that a fair bit. Something that I've said of late, which I never used to say, because I think we've moved into a new era, is I get a lot of people coming to my school who are informed. They're just more informed than 10 years ago. Half of them know what ADCC is. Like, what the hell? Right? That's weird. But so I get people asking, new school jiu-jitsu, modern jiu-jitsu, old school jiu-jitsu. Are you more old school jiu-jitsu? So sometimes I have to explain that now, which is quite a weird thing. I never had to do that even 5 years ago. So I think people are just doing some research now.
Mm-hmm.
And they somehow form a view that there's an old school jiu-jitsu and a new school jiu-jitsu. And new school is about inverting and spinning under and coming out to backside 50-50 heel hook or K-guard or whatever it is, or whatever you want to do. And old school jiu-jitsu is under the guard pass, side control, mount. So I have a discussion about that every now and again, about how it's almost like saying conservative and liberal. Do you use those terms in Canada?
Yep.
In politics or something, it's you want to kind of ideally, in my view, be more centrist, because then if something great happens on the left, you're happy to adopt it. If something great happens on the right, you're happy to adopt it. What you don't want to be is on the ends. And I think jiu-jitsu is a little bit like that. If you're an extremist, then you are super conservative jiu-jitsu, meaning you're only teaching these old school things because you don't know anything about the new stuff. You don't want to know, you haven't got the time, and it's confusing to you. So and you
don't spar till blue belt, and
you're
practice.
Too old. I'm not going to mention any names, but you're past the point where you don't want to. So you just stick to, and you come up with some niche term that suggests that you know what you're talking about, and you do know what you're talking about, but you don't want to embrace the new stuff. And then you've got the other extremist is all about what's the latest, craziest, weird shit, but they can't apply pressure and, do so-called alternate next. But they're extreme ends. So you want to be somewhere in the middle. So you can be looking at all the new developments on the left, let's say, the liberal side. But you can also understand that in a real fight, you're only going to do these conservative things. And weirdly enough, the better you do the conservative things, the more able you'll be able to do the non-conservative things. So I give that kind of talk. That's a more long-winded discussion. So I do address that every now and again, maybe once a month, to talk about that to them. But people are coming in having formed views, which is bizarre. So,
well, a lot of them are also being informed by people who have an agenda, people who are so far off to one side or the other that those people have a vested financial interest in you signing up with self-defense only jiu-jitsu versus modern only jiu-jitsu. Modern is best. Self-defense is best. And you don't want to look at any of that new stuff. Well, there's a great saying by friends of mine on the Spirituality podcast. Is like, watch what they say and then look at what they sell. So if somebody who's selling makes their living from an agenda, be careful if they're pushing that agenda as the be all and end all. to your martial arts training?
I like everything. I mean, I guess because it's, I'm more center.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that I'm just going to use these words, conservative and super liberal or speculative.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm an investor, I just want to buy, I don't know what it is in America, but BHP share stocks and, it's very clear, but don't expect anything amazing to happen. You're just going to not lose your money. And then I could go, I'm all in on Ethereum and Bitcoin. Now, that can have a disastrous outcome, but, I put 30 or 40K into just 1% of my portfolio into crypto because it's fucking super speculative, and this and that. But I made like a couple of $100,000 because I wasn't overly greedy. The conservative part of me went, 8 times my investment is good enough. I'm out. Right?
So similarly, you might be occasionally screwing around with spinning into berimbolo into a leg lock or something.
Right.
That's your speculative investment in the sport.
That's exactly right. So I want dessert, but I'm not living on it. You know what I mean? I want dessert, but that's not my main nutritional. So I think they're equally good. They're equally important. We do need people living in the extremes. I actually believe that. There's value to having people right on the ends, not where I would want to be, but those people do
drive the sport forward.
They drive it forward and they make interesting things. But that's, so I want to extract all the value I can from each one. And the best place to do that's from the middle. It's like turning into a political commentary, but I'm sure you can probably relate to it.
Well, I think the left-right, and probably if you look at it in a jiu-jitsu context, left-right, conservative, liberal is it's only one axis, and people occur on much more than just one axis. There's probably like 4 or 5 main axes. And so in the jiu-jitsu space, you could think of pressure testing versus no pressure testing. You could think of self-defense versus sport. You could think of inclusive for the public versus only catering to elite athletes. So right away, those are 3 axes. And you could, in theory, have, a self-defense school that only caters to extreme athletes. What was the other axis? Anyhow, you to divide it left and right, to divide it conservative and liberal, it's a very rough first order separation.
That's great. That's a really interesting. Yeah, I'd not thought of that. That's great. Yeah, excellent. Which just broadens the idea out even further. And the way the best place to access all those axes are from right dead center, right?
Yeah. I like your dessert analogy. Like, I'm glad that there's somebody out there who just lives and breathes dessert and finds the very best ones and says, you have to try this. I don't know.
Yeah.
Pomegranate, chocolate, whatever the hell, mousse thing. But I'm glad I'm not eating it all the time.
But I'm glad you've done the work to figure it out.
Yeah.
For me. 100%. Perfect. Yeah, that's it.
Well, John, thank you so much. You're in Geelong.
Geelong.
All right. So if people are there, they can train with you. But you've also got a ton of affiliate schools which have been influenced by you and your teaching. So people can find you and your association pretty easily, I think, online. It's
bjj.com.au.
Oh,
yeah, there you go. Not hard to find.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I don't charge, affiliate all these fees, and I don't do any of that. That's why we've got a big. If anyone's out there want to create a big organization, here's an idea. Don't ask people for money. Right?
Yeah.
Just be okay with all that, and then you create a network which can give you a lot more income if you've got actual value to these people. Don't be saying, give me $1,000 a month or any of this bullshit, and then you'll grow and you'll have hundreds of people. There's a hint.
The secrets to jiu-jitsu growth revealed.
Yeah.
So. Well, John, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope to catch you on one of your rare, or increasingly rare seminar tours. And apologize for only catching a few minutes of you the last time that you were in town.
I will get to Seattle because I have a student there, Brian Johnson.
Yeah.
And Brian's one of my black belts. So, and my kid was over there just a month ago training with him, and Brian were working out for a week. And Seattle is one of my favorite cities in America. So I promise Brian that I'll have to get back. So I will get to Brian at some point, which is not
It's just a hop, skip, and a jump across a small ocean.
Yeah. Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, yeah. That's nothing. But for you, just drive down the road.
Yeah.
Or I'll drive up.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And best of luck with all your retirement plans, which look a lot like your pre-retirement plans.
Almost no difference. Thanks, Stephan.